long before fire lit the hearts of men, before language bound their thoughts, and long before the thunder god reigned from atop Olympus. There was only shadow below the heavens. The world crawled beneath the cold breath of night, and humanity fragile, shapeless, and afraid huddled in the cracks of mountains, nameless and voiceless, merely surviving. They were not yet creatures of cities or stories. They did not speak. They did not bill. They feared the wind. They feared the darkness. And most of all, they feared the gods who watched from above. The gods, radiant and magnificent, had carved out the cosmos in the wake of chaos. Zeus, king of the sky and wielder of the lightning bolt, had overthrown his father, Cronus, and claimed dominion over all things that breathed. His siblings Hera, Poseidon, Hades, Hestia, and Demeter ruled their realms with celestial certainty. Olympus was born atop a mountain so high that its summit pierced the fabric between earth and heaven, and down below, mortals, little more than dust. The gods looked down with indifference, all except one, Prometheus, a titan, but not like the others. When the gods warred against Cronus, Prometheus stood beside Zeus, forsaking his own kin. He saw in the Olympians something new, a potential order to replace the chaos that had once consumed all. And yet now, standing among them, he saw something worse. Apathy. One morning, when the sky was clear and the clouds hung low like drapes of silk, Prometheus stood beside the edge of Olympus, looking down on the world. He saw the mortals pale, shivering, blind to everything but hunger. He watched a mother cradle a dead child, a man scrape his fingers against a stone until they bled. Trying to carve a blade with no fire, he turned away from the ledge, fury hardening in his chest. Later that day, Zeus held court. The great marble throne room of Olympus shimmered with divine light. Nectar flowed in golden fountains. Ambrosia scented the air. Gods lounged in opulence, laughter echoing against diamond walls. "We must discuss the next gifts," Zeus announced, his voice like thunder muffled in velvet. "We have given the sea to Poseidon, the harvest to Demeter, the hearth to Hestia. And what of man?" A ripple of laughter passed through the gods. "They are creatures of mud," said Ares. "Let them fight among themselves. They worship poorly." Hera sniffed. "With no temples, no rites, not even a decent song." Apollo played a note on his lyre. "I offered them music. They did not understand." Only Prometheus did not laugh. "They do not yet understand," he said, "because we have given them nothing. No warmth, no knowledge. They huddle in the cold, fearing beasts and night alike." Zeus waved a hand dismissively. "They are not ready. And what are they to us?" Prometheus's jaw clenched. "They are our responsibility." The court fell silent. Zeus raised a brow. "And what would you give them?" "Titan." Prometheus hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Hope." A beat of silence. Then laughter again. "Hope. A thing the gods themselves barely understood. A thing that could stir defiance." Prometheus said nothing more. But inside, a flame had been lit. That night, as Olympus slept beneath a curtain of stars, Prometheus descended the winding paths of the mountain, his thoughts like storms. He walked among mortals, unseen. He watched a boy try to warm his hands over a pile of dry leaves. He watched a father sharpen bone into a point, snapping it in frustration. He looked up toward the sky, where the forge of Hephaestus glowed faintly from the peak of Olympus. He knew what he had to do. Prometheus waited for the right moment. When Hephaestus left his forge to attend one of Dionysus's eternal feasts, the fire was left alone, churning, pulsing, alive. He ascended the forge with silent steps. The chamber was alive with heat, every wall glowing red like the inside of a dragon's belly. Hammers rested on anvil stones, chains hung like vines, and in the center of it all, fire, pure, divine, the first flame. Prometheus took a reed hollow, dry, a thing of nature. He reached into the flame and drew out a single spark, cupping it within the reed. The fire did not burn him. It understood him. As he fled back down the mountain, the wind howled. Clouds swirled. Somewhere in the distance, an eagle shrieked. The gods would know, but by then, it would be too late. He returned to the mortal world, crouched low in a forest clearing, and brought the reed to the dry brush. It caught fire. At first, the humans fled. They had seen fire only in lightning, only in death. But Prometheus stayed. He reached into the flame and warmed his hands. He showed them gently how to cook meat, how to harden spears, how to gather around it and not be afraid. The first night, fire burned on earth. Stories were born, not words yet, but sounds. Gestures, shared moments. Shadows danced on the cave walls. Children laughed for the first time. Hope, it bloomed. And far above, Zeus stirred. The council of the immortal, the flame had been stolen. It had crept through Olympus like a ghost, unseen until its absence was undeniable. The forge of Hephaestus was cold, its embers dimmed. The fire of the gods, once bound to Olympus, now flickered in the hands of mortals below. They warmed themselves by it. They cooked their food, forged new tools, sharpened their world. Their eyes gleamed in the night. Their stories took shape. Zeus sat in silence. His throne, carved from the clouds of the highest heavens, overlooked all things. He could see the rise of smoke from distant valleys, smell ash on the wind, the scent of defiance, the scent of a gift never meant to be given. His fists clenched. Thunder rolled in the skies. "Summon the council," he said. One by one, they came. Hera, eyes sharp with suspicion. Athena, calm and calculating. Apollo, radiant with golden disdain. Ares, armored and eager. Demeter, cloaked in green and patience. Hephaestus, with soot on his hands and shame in his eyes. Hermes, already knowing, already grinning. They gathered in the Hall of Clouds, the heart of Olympus, a place where mortal breath had never touched. Zeus rose from his throne. The room quieted beneath his gaze. "One among us," he began, "has broken our decree." He looked not at Hephaestus, nor Hermes, nor Apollo. He looked at the empty space, near the colonnade, the space where Prometheus should have stood. "The flame has been stolen." Murmurs filled the air. Mortals have no right to divine fire. Hera snapped. "It is not meant for beasts of clay. They light it with trembling hands," said Athena. "But trembling hands can still throw torches. What use do they have for it?" Ares growled. "Let them freeze. Let them fight with stone. They are animals. They are evolving." Hermes mused, leaning on his caduceus. "They shape things now. They whisper. They dream." Zeus raised his hand. "They dream because Prometheus gave them what was forbidden. He betrayed Olympus." Again, Hephaestus muttered. All eyes turned to him. "He stood with us against the Titans," Zeus said. "He earned his place, and now he's betrayed it." Apollo added, "Is it not treason to uplift those we chose to leave crawling?" Zeus turned toward the open sky. Below, the fires burned small, but growing. Everywhere. "I warned him," Zeus said. "I warned him when he first spoke of hope." He turned back to the council. "He will answer for this." Prometheus stood alone on a high cliff, far below Olympus, but higher than any mortal dared climb. He watched the flames flicker in distant valleys. He heard the sound of laughter, of music made from bone flutes and drum skins. A civilization breathing its first breath. He knew the gods would come. He had not hidden his crime, but he had no regret. He had given them warmth, creation, possibility. He had given them choice. Behind him, the sky split. A crack of thunder. The wind coiled like serpents. Zeus descended. He did not roar. He did not strike. He landed with silence, with the weight of judgment. Prometheus did not kneel. "You've come," he said. "You've stolen," Zeus answered. "I've given." Lightning curled around Zeus's fist. "They are not ready. They were dying. They still will." A pause. The wind died. "You have broken the law of Olympus. Then make new laws, ones that do not keep light from the living." Zeus stepped forward. "You pity them so much, Prometheus. Then you shall suffer as they do." Prometheus stared into the god's eyes. "So be it." Hephaestus was summoned. He forged chains from unbreakable adamantine, smelted with sorrow and silence. Hermes was ordered to deliver him. The Titan, once ally of Olympus, was bound and dragged through the clouds to the edge of the world, to the mountain where winds never rested, where even eagles feared to fly, the Caucasus. There, Prometheus was chained, not by punishment, but by example, so all would remember what happens to those who defy the heavens. And far below, the fires still burned, the reed and the flame. The Caucasus loomed behind him. Prometheus stood alone beneath the stars, his back to the roaring mountain winds. The chains were not yet upon him, not yet, but the choice had already been made. The punishment had already been forged. All that remained now was the giving. He had one day, one night, one chance to deliver the flame. The forge of Hephaestus was not just a place of fire and steel. It was the beating heart of Olympus. From it came the weapons of gods, the armor of heroes, and the tools that shaped creation itself. 1,000 furnaces roared in harmony. Bellows breathed like dragons. Sparks danced like stars. Prometheus entered in silence. Hephaestus was away, summoned to a feast of Dionysus. Even the god of the forge needed rest. Prometheus moved through the chambers like a shadow, past anvils inscribed with runes older than language, past hammers that once shaped continents. He came to the sacred hearth, the first flame suspended in a bronze brazier at the forge's core. It was not fire as mortals knew it. It did not crackle. It sang, a low, humming song of warmth and light, of fury and transformation. It pulsed with creation, the original gift from chaos to the world. Prometheus reached into the folds of his cloak and drew out a simple reed hollow, dry, taken from the banks of a forgotten river, a thing of the world, not of Olympus. He stepped forward. The flame sensed him. It flared not in warning, but in welcome. For Prometheus was not like the others. He did not seek to wield the fire. He came to share it. He touched the tip of the reed to the flame, and the fire entered it, not wildly, not hungrily, but gently, as if it had waited to be carried. Prometheus held it in his hands, a single ember, a whisper of eternity, and without another word, he turned and left the forge. He descended from Olympus with the fire cradled close. The winds tried to snuff it out. The stars blinked in alarm, but the ember held. Below, the world slept in cold silence. He found them, the humans, huddled in a cave at the edge of a forest. Their skin was raw with frost. Their children cried softly. Their food was rotting. Their tools were dull. They had no songs, no stories, only fear. Prometheus stepped into their midst. They did not run. They did not bow. They only stared. He knelt beside a pile of dry leaves. He lowered the reed, and the world changed. A flame burst forth, bright, real, theirs. The humans screamed at first, but Prometheus remained calm. He reached into the fire, showed them it could warm, not burn. He brought meat close, showed them how it cooked. He laid a branch in the flames, then pulled it out, glowing red, a weapon. A tool. The humans gathered around, hesitant, curious. The flames painted shadows on the cave walls. Shadows became shapes. Shapes became stories. And somewhere, deep in their chests, something awakened. Not fear, not hunger, but hope. All that night, Prometheus taught how to feed the fire, how to tend it, how to pass it on, Children laughed as sparks danced. Elders wept as warmth soaked their bones. Hunters shaped better blades. Mothers boiled water clean. And all of them, for the first time, looked at the darkness beyond their cave and did not tremble. They looked at Prometheus with something no god had ever received from them: gratitude. And he said only one thing: "This is your gift. Guard it well." He left before dawn, back to the cliffs, back to the judgment, back to the mountain. The chains were waiting, the wrath of Zeus. The gods awoke to the smell of ash. It was not the sacred ash of sacrifice, not the sweet, spiced smoke of offerings that rose to Olympus on festival days. This was a different scent course, earthen, wild. It carried the sharp tang of rebellion. It drifted on winds that once belonged to the gods alone, and it came from below. Zeus stood at the edge of Olympus, eyes narrowed at the horizon. Where there had once been darkness, now flickered thousands of tiny lights, campfires, torches, forges, flames born of divine theft. Passed into mortal hands, he turned away from the world, and thunder followed him. In the great hall of storms, clouds gathered like a ceiling of wrath. The pillars were carved from frozen lightning. The floor shimmered with currents of trapped wind. At the center, Zeus stood alone, fists clenched. Prometheus. The word echoed not only in the room, but across the heavens. It reached the ears of Hera in her crystal garden, of Poseidon in the roaring depths, of Hades far below. Seated upon his obsidian throne, the gods knew he had done it. He had defied Olympus. The Council of Immortals was summoned once more. Hera entered first, her footsteps a whisper of judgment. "I warned you," she said to Zeus. He was always too fond of clay, too fond of himself. Ares added, swaggering in with a clatter of armor. Athena sat without a word. She had foreseen this. Of course she had. But still, even she was uncertain what punishment would match a crime of such scale. Apollo, gleaming as ever, shook his head. "They burn our gift like wood. They forge swords with it. They sing to it as if it were their god now." Zeus stood before them, his gaze distant. Hephaestus limped in last. His forge had been violated. Yet a part of him buried beneath ash and metal felt pride. Someone had understood his creation. Hermes hovered near the edge of the room, expression unreadable. Finally, Zeus spoke. "He has betrayed Olympus." No one disagreed. "He has stolen from our sacred flame." Silence. "He has given power where there should have been fear." Still silence. "And he shall be punished." He called for the eagle to be forged. Not a creature of nature, but a beast of torment. Hephaestus shaped it from bronze and hunger. Its eyes lit with unquenchable fire. Its talons could tear stone. Its beak could pierce the divine. Then, from the very bones of the world, he forged chains, not of steel, but of oath and silence, unbreakable, eternal. Prometheus watched all this from the heights. He did not flee. He did not speak. When Hermes arrived to deliver the sentence, Prometheus greeted him with a nod. "Did they send you as executioner or witness?" Hermes shrugged. "Perhaps both." Prometheus turned his eyes to the sky. It was worth it. Hermes said nothing. Together, they ascended the mountain that would become the Titan's prison, the Caucasus. The wind here was different. It howled not like wolves, but like memory. The snow never melted. The rock was sharper than truth. Prometheus was shackled against a sheer cliff face. The chains wrapped around his wrists, his ankles, his neck. They pulsed faintly with divine warning. He remained silent, and then the eagle came. Its cry split the sky. Mortals far below clutched their chests in terror. The beast descended, wings wider than ships, talons gleaming. Prometheus turned his head just enough to see it. Then came pain. Not of flesh, he could endure that, but of eternity. The eagle tore into him. It ripped his side, pulled free his liver, flew away with a scream. Prometheus screamed only once. By nightfall, the wound had closed. By dawn, the eagle returned, and so began the torment without end. For 30 years, the punishment held. Each day the eagle fed. Each night, his body healed. No relief, no peace, no death. But Prometheus did not break. He remembered the fires he had lit, the children who laughed, the songs that were now sung beside flames. He remembered humanity, and it gave him strength. Zeus watched. For all his fury, for all his power, he watched. He expected begging, regret, surrender, but none came. Instead, the mortal world grew with fire. They built. With fire, they challenged the cold. With fire, they became more. Zeus's thunder dimmed. The gods grew quieter, and Prometheus, high above them all, endured. Chains on the mountain. The mountain remembers, even when the gods forget, when the winds shift, and mortal kings fall into dust. The mountain remains, cold, towering, silent. It holds the stories that heaven tried to bury, etched into its stone, carried in its storm, and none is older than the Titan who hung against its cliffs. Prometheus, bound by the will of Zeus, shackled with chains forged by the god of fire himself, he had become not a prisoner, but a monument. The eagle came as always, a beast of divine punishment. It tore and consumed. It left him bleeding and broken. But Prometheus never screamed again. He had made peace with pain, and in that peace, he remembered. Each morning, before the eagle's cry echoed through the canyon, Prometheus recalled their faces, the boy who had burned his first torch with wonder, the girl who used flame to cook roots for her aging father, the tribe that once feared the forest and now walked its paths with firelight in hand. He did not speak aloud, for no one was near to hear, but the mountain listened, in the cracks of stone, in the whisper of snow across his chest, in the drip of water through ice. The world learned his story, and it carried it onward. Centuries passed. Below, the humans no longer lived in caves. They had built villages, then towns, then cities. Fires burned not just for survival, but for worship, for war, for art. They forged metal. They wove songs. They buried their dead and told tales by firelight. Tales of a Titan who had defied the sky, of a god who had given them warmth. They no longer remembered his name, but they remembered the gift. And so, Prometheus endured, not in silence, but in defiance. Zeus watched, at first, with fury, then confusion, then doubt. He had expected the fire to fade, for man to forget, for ice and shadow to reclaim what had been borrowed. But the flame had spread. No god had given them temples, yet they built them. No god had taught them speech, yet they sang. And through it all, Prometheus endured. The gods began to argue. Hera called for more punishment. Ares wanted war. Athena warned of rebellion. Apollo grew quiet. Only Zeus remained still. In his silence, storms brewed, but still, he did not destroy Prometheus, because deep in the core of his thunder-wrapped soul, Zeus felt something strange. A sliver of respect. Prometheus, for his part, changed too. His body remained the same divine, unaging, regenerating endlessly, but his mind grew vast, hanging alone between sky and stone. He dreamed of futures. He saw cities made of fire and glass. He saw ships sailing not oceans, but stars. He saw children born in warmth and light, never knowing the cold he once stood against. And in those visions, he smiled. He had given them not just fire, he had given them tomorrow. One day, a shadow climbed the mountain. A man, not a god, but not wholly mortal either. He bore the strength of Olympus and the sorrow of men, and in his eyes burned a familiar flame. Heracles, the son of Zeus, the agony eternal. The eagle came at dawn, its cry pierced the frost-bitten sky. Its wings slicing through clouds as though they were parchment. The mountain, ancient and unmoved, seemed to groan with each beat of its talons, and chained to its cliff face bound by thunder, oaths, and divine law was Prometheus, who waited. He no longer flinched. Pain had become ritual, familiar, an unwelcome guest that refused to leave, but no longer shocked him. When the eagle landed with a thud that shook the stones, Prometheus opened his eyes and watched. Its eyes blazed with the fire of Olympus. Its beak gleamed with gore. It tore into him not with hatred, but with purpose, a creature fulfilling its role in a punishment older than memory. It dug deep again and again, pulling his liver from his side, and Prometheus, mouth clenched and eyes wide, endured. He always endured. By nightfall, the eagle was gone, and his body began its quiet repair. The divine blood of a titan could not be spent so easily. His wounds closed like secrets, his flesh reformed. By midnight, he was whole again, only to be broken again by dawn. This was the eternity that Zeus had chosen for him. Not a cell, not oblivion, but this, an endless cycle of suffering. High above the world he had tried to save, and yet, in the silence between pain, he dreamed. He dreamed of firelight in villages. He dreamed of laughter. He dreamed of wheels turning, of stories shared, of mothers who no longer wept from the cold. He dreamed of the world that he had ignited. The eagle could take his flesh, but it could not take the hope he had planted. Elsewhere, the gods debated. Athena watched the mortals build libraries. Apollo listened to their music. Demeter saw their fields stretch wider than ever. Even Ares noticed that their wars now had meaning, that men bled not for chaos, but for causes. And Zeus remained silent. He stood at the edge of Olympus, gazing not at Prometheus, but at the smoke that rose from 1,000 mortal homes. There was no undoing what had been done, but there was still the matter of punishment. So the eagle flew, every day, for decades. On the 490th dawn, something changed. Prometheus sensed it before he saw it, a presence on the slopes below, not divine, but not entirely mortal. Someone was climbing. The mountain, which had known only gods and birds, now felt new footsteps. He opened his eyes as the eagle shrieked above. The wind whispered a name he hadn't heard in eons. Heracles. The eagle dove. Prometheus, bloodied and exhausted, whispered into the wind. It ends soon. The agony eternal. The eagle came at dawn. Its cry pierced the frost-bitten sky, its wings slicing through clouds as though they were parchment. The mountain, ancient and unmoved, seemed to groan with each beat of its talons, and chained to its cliff face bound by thunder, oaths, and divine law, was Prometheus, who waited. He no longer flinched. Pain had become ritual, familiar, an unwelcome guest that refused to leave but no longer shocked him. When the eagle landed with a thud that shook the stones, Prometheus opened his eyes and watched. Its eyes blazed with the fire of Olympus. Its beak gleamed with gore. It tore into him not with hatred, but with purpose, a creature fulfilling its role in a punishment older than memory. It dug deep again and again, pulling his liver from his side, and Prometheus, mouth clenched and eyes wide, endured. He always endured. By nightfall, the eagle was gone, and his body began its quiet repair. The divine blood of a titan could not be spent so easily. His wounds closed like secrets, his flesh reformed. By midnight, he was whole again, only to be broken again by dawn. This was the eternity that Zeus had chosen for him. Not a cell, not oblivion, but this, an endless cycle of suffering. High above the world he had tried to save, and yet, in the silence between pain, he dreamed. He dreamed of firelight in villages. He dreamed of laughter. He dreamed of wheels turning, of stories shared, of mothers who no longer wept from the cold. He dreamed of the world that he had ignited. The eagle could take his flesh, but it could not take the hope he had planted elsewhere. The gods debated. Athena watched the mortals build libraries. Apollo listened to their music. Demeter saw their fields stretch wider than ever. Even Ares noticed that their wars now had meaning, that men bled not for chaos, but for causes, and Zeus. Zeus remained silent. He stood at the edge of Olympus, gazing not at Prometheus, but at the smoke that rose from 1,000 mortal homes. There was no undoing what had been done, but there was still the matter of punishment. So the eagle flew every day, for decades. On the 490th dawn, something changed. Prometheus sensed it before he saw it. A presence on the slopes below, not divine, but not entirely mortal. Someone was climbing. The mountain, which had known only gods and birds, now felt new footsteps. He opened his eyes as the eagle shrieked above. The wind whispered a name he hadn't heard in eons. Heracles. The eagle dove. Prometheus, bloodied and exhausted, whispered into the wind. It ends soon. The son of thunder. Snow crunched beneath sandals hardened by travel. The air thinned as he climbed, but he did not slow. The winds cut like knives. The stone paths vanished into mist, and still he pressed onward, one hand gripping a lion's skin slung over his shoulder, the other resting on the hilt of a club carved from a tree, said to be older than men. This was Heracles, son of Zeus, son of pain, born not to Olympus but to hardship, forged in labor, known in song. Yet there were no songs here, only silence and screams carried on the wind. He climbed the Caucasus not for glory, but because something within him burned brighter than any torch. Something his father had long forgotten, justice. From the heights above, Prometheus opened his eyes. Through the haze of pain and memory, he saw the figure inching ever higher. Not a god, not a mortal, a bridge between. Heracles. The wind whispered his name, like a prophecy fulfilled. The eagle sensed it too. It circled higher, talons ready, wings trembling with anticipation. Prometheus closed his eyes again, not in despair, but in hope. He remembered the words he had once spoken to the void. One day, a son of Olympus will come not to punish, but to release. Heracles reached the final ridge. He saw him, the Titan, bound and broken, but somehow still more whole than any god. He also saw the eagle. It shrieked, talons flashing, descending like judgment. Heracles did not wait. He leapt from the stone. The eagle met him in midair, fang and flame. Claw and fury, the two collided in a scream of wind and feathers. Talons tore at flesh, but Heracles did not yield. His club rose like a mountain and fell with the force of storms. Once, twice, a third time, and the eagle shattered against the stone. Bones crushed, wings twisted. The mountain groaned. The sky fell silent. Prometheus opened his eyes, and for the first time in centuries, the pain was gone. Heracles approached. His arms bled. His breath came in gasps, but his eyes held steady. He reached up and took hold of the chains. They burned. They resisted. They whispered divine warnings, but he pulled. With every ounce of bloodline and will, he pulled, and the chains broke. One by one, the last one snapped, like thunder cracking through the spine of heaven. Prometheus fell forward, and Heracles caught him. The Titan, still pale, managed a smile. You are your father's son, and yet not. Heracles only nodded. Why did you come? Prometheus asked. Heracles looked down the mountain. Because you believed they deserved fire, and I believe you deserve freedom. Prometheus looked up at the sky. The clouds trembled, but no lightning came, only silence. Permission. Together, they descended. The Titan who gave humanity fire, and the demigod who gave him back his soul. Above them, the eagle's corpse lay still. Below them, the world burned with invention, with music, with life. And far off in Olympus, Zeus stood at his balcony and said nothing, but his eyes, for once, did not burn with rage, only memory, and perhaps, though he would never speak it, respect. The first fire-bearer freed, the wind no longer cut like knives, as Prometheus stepped down the mountain, stone beneath his bare feet. The air seemed to soften. The cold no longer clung to him like a shroud. For the first time in thousands of years, he walked, not dragged, not bound, not tormented, but free. Heracles followed close behind, silent as a shadow. They did not speak much. Words were not needed. The shared breath of battle and liberation hung between them like incense. Prometheus, despite his wounds and weariness, moved with purpose not toward Olympus, but away from it. He was not returning to the gods. He was returning to the world he had helped build. Villages stood where once there had been caves. Smoke curled from chimneys, not from fear, but from home. Children played with toys carved from wood and iron. Fire no longer meant danger. It meant life. Prometheus walked among them, unrecognized. He saw farmers who used the heat of the forge to shape plows. He saw blacksmiths crafting tools and art, not just weapons. He saw women tending hearths where stories were born with each flicker of flame. He smiled. The world had not only survived, it had blossomed. They had taken his gift, and instead of burning each other with it, they had built bridges, kindled songs, and forged futures, and not one of them bowed, because they did not remember who he was. That, more than any praise, was the true gift. Word spread, as it always does, of the Titan who walked like a man, whose presence seemed to calm storms, whose eyes flickered like firelight. Some called him a prophet, some called him a ghost, but he refused all temples. He gave no commandments. He only stayed a while in each place, long enough to listen, to learn, to light a fire if one was needed. Then he moved on, like flame passed from torch to torch. In Olympus, silence lingered. Zeus sat upon his throne, unmoving. The other gods awaited his command, but none came. He watched as mortals built cities. He watched as they challenged the sea, mapped the stars, and tamed the earth. They no longer needed the gods to speak for them. And Zeus, lord of sky and storm, said nothing, because he knew the truth. Prometheus had changed the world more than any god ever had, not with fear, not with force, but with a gift. One day, as Heracles prepared to return to his path, he found Prometheus sitting beside a river, watching children skip stones. They still don't know what you gave them. Heracles said, "They don't need to." Prometheus replied, "Do you miss Olympus?" The Titan turned to him. "No, Olympus was never my home. This is..." He gestured to the village, to the smoke rising in spirals, to the laughter, to the warmth. "This is what I bled for. This is what I burned for." And Heracles nodded. Then, without another word, the son of Zeus departed, his place in history secured, and Prometheus remained, not to rule, not to guide, but to walk beside. At night, when the stars blinked open, Prometheus looked skyward, not with longing, but with peace. He had climbed the mountain. He had survived the eagle. He had outlasted the god's fury. And now he watched the fires of mankind flicker into the dark, not as rebellion, not as defiance, but as light, the spark that could not die. Time passed. Though the stars kept no count of it, empires rose and crumbled. Cities of marble gave way to streets of steel and smoke. Temples turned to ruins. New gods were named, and old ones forgotten. But still, beneath it all, fire burned, not just in hearths or furnaces, but in hearts. And wherever fire flickered, so too did the name of Prometheus. The Titan no longer walked openly among men. He did not need to. He had become myth, a story whispered across generations, through ash and candlelight. Children asked their elders why the fire warmed them, why it danced, and the elders would say, "Because someone once defied the gods and gave it to us." In some tales, he was a rebel. In others, a savior. Sometimes, he was a fool who dared too much. But in all versions, he was the one who gave. Prometheus became more than a figure. He became a symbol of defiance, of hope, of enduring light. But symbols do not die. They shift. They evolve. They wait. Prometheus watched from far places, from mountain tops, from the edge of dream, from the shadows behind invention. He was there when the first wheel turned beneath fire-forged spokes. He was there when scribes dipped their pens in flame-lit halls. He was there when men looked up at the stars and realized they could fly. And in those moments, he felt it, the spark, unchanged, unstoppable. Zeus still watched too. He stood atop a quieter Olympus now, a kingdom no longer feared, but remembered. He saw the flickers of flame, carried farther than he had imagined to every continent, to every culture, and in his heart, he no longer felt anger, only awe, because Prometheus had not simply given mankind fire. He had taught them how to pass it on. One evening, in a city of towers and glass, a young girl sat beside a machine that glowed with a soft, artificial light. She tapped keys, her eyes burning with questions. Above her desk, a single candle flickered, unnecessary, but comforting. Her grandfather had lit it every night before bed, and now she did too. She didn't know why. Outside her window, smoke curled into a skylit not by torches, but by neon and satellite. Still, the flame burned. Still, Prometheus watched and smiled. For the fire he gave was more than warmth. It was curiosity. It was creation. It was the refusal to accept darkness. And in every act of discovery, in every light switched on, in every boundary pushed back, the flame lived again, no longer chained, no longer hidden. It moved, from hand to hand, from age to age, a gift that could not be taken back. Prometheus did not seek worship. He had never asked to be remembered, but he had planted something eternal. And even when stars die, and mountains fall, and gods are forgotten, fire will remain, and in its glow, a whisper. I gave this to you. Use it well. Ashes, echoes, and immortality. The world had changed. The fires that once flickered on cave walls now pulsed from towers that touched the clouds. The stars, once distant, were now mapped and reached for. Humanity no longer feared the dark. They had bent it, broken it, lit it from within. Yet in all their triumph, they never truly knew what they had inherited. Because the gift of Prometheus had stopped being a story. It had become a foundation. Prometheus stood once more at the edge of a cliff. Not the Caucasus, not Olympus, a place unknown to history, untouched by time where fire met sky, and silence wrapped the earth. He watched the sun rise, as he had thousands of times before. But this dawn was different, not brighter, not warmer, only quieter, because he knew his story was ending, not in defeat, not in tragedy, but in transcendence. He remembered everything, the moment he touched the first flame, the first scream beneath the eagle's talons, the laughter of children gathered around a fire, the silent climb of Heracles. He remembered the wrath of Zeus, the silence of the gods, and the light in human eyes when they first understood the power they held. He remembered the giving and how it had changed the world. They would never build temples to him. There would be no hymns, no prayers. But every time a match was struck, every time a mind sparked with an idea, every time someone dared to reach for more, despite fear, despite consequence, that was worship enough, because Prometheus had not set out to be a god. He had set out to be a servant of hope, and in doing so, had become eternal, far above. The halls of Olympus had grown silent. Zeus remained, but he no longer ruled. He watched from the clouds as mankind stood tall, without divine guidance. He listened as their voices filled the earth, their stories eclipsing his own. He remembered the Titan he had punished, and the fire that had spread in spite of him, and for once he smiled, not in defeat, not in surrender, but in respect, because Prometheus had done what no god had dared. He had trusted humanity, and they had proven him right. Prometheus turned from the edge. He walked into the forest, into the light, not as a Titan, not as a myth, but as a whisper carried in flame, a shadow at every forge, a breath behind every invention, and a memory that once, when gods hoarded the fire, one dared to share it, and the world never forgot. The theft of fire. In the earliest days, before cities were carved into stone, and before language took root in the tongues of men, the earth was cloaked in a still, dim silence. The skies above were ruled by the immortals, the gods who reigned from high atop the white peaks of Olympus. These beings shaped the seas, the sun, and the moon with idle gestures, and they spun fate itself like golden thread. The mortals, crude and trembling, crawled across the barren world below. They were without fire, without tools, without light. Zeus, king of gods and wielder of thunder, looked down upon these mortal creatures with the mild disdain of a ruler surveying ants. He had no interest in their growth, nor their suffering. He ruled the skies, commanded the storms, and concerned himself only with oaths and order. Mortals were insignificant, flawed, fleeting, but there was one who looked upon them differently. Prometheus, a Titan born before the Olympian reign, had once stood with Zeus against their common enemy, Cronus. While most Titans were cast into Tartarus, Prometheus had been spared for his loyalty, but his heart remained with the earth, not the heavens. He saw the mortals not as failures, but as potential. In their wide eyes and shivering hands, he saw the seeds of greatness, and so he began to guide them. He taught them to build with stone, to shape wood into shelter, to hear meaning in sound and shape it into word. He gave them rhythm, mathematics, and the cycles of the stars. But without fire, all was incomplete. They could not cook food, nor mold metal. They froze in the cold and perished in the night. Their lives were short and brutal. Prometheus pleaded with Zeus to let him give fire to the mortals. Zeus refused. It is divine. The thunder god decreed, fire belongs to Olympus. Give it to mortals, and they will rise beyond their place. They will challenge what should be feared. Prometheus bowed his head, but did not submit. He had made his decision on a night when the stars were silent, and even the winds dared not whisper. Prometheus crept into the forge of Hephaestus, god of fire and craft. The place pulsed with the heat of 1,000 molten rivers. The hammers of automatons rang like drums in the deep. It was here, in the heart of Olympus, that Prometheus reached for flame. He did not use his hands, for they would have betrayed him. Instead, he took a hollow stalk of fennel, a living reed of the mortal world, and reached into the sacred hearth. The fire leapt into the stalk with a hiss and a flicker, not angrily, but as if it had waited to be taken. Prometheus fled with his prize, hidden in his cloak. The stars trembled above, unsure whether to weep or sing. He descended to the earth, wind roaring at his heels. When he arrived among the mortal, he found them as he had left them, huddled in caves, wrapped in skins, their eyes wide and filled with hunger. Without a word, he reached into the fennel stalk. The fire sprang forth. It lit the night, and the world changed. At first, the mortals recoiled, afraid. The flame danced and snapped. It glowed and writhed. But then Prometheus knelt beside it. He showed them how it could warm their hands, how it could be fed, how it could turn raw meat into a feast, harden tools into weapons, cast shadows that moved like dreams. Around the fire, they began to speak. They began to dream. They told stories, and with stories came civilization. The gods watched in silence. At first, they saw no danger. The fire was small. The mortals were weak. But then the flames spread. They moved from valley to valley, from cave to village. They glowed on mountain tops, in forests, and near rivers. The mortals did not worship the flame, they used it. And with it, they rose. Zeus felt it like a wound. He summoned the gods to his hall, and thunder gathered in his voice. Prometheus, he growled, has betrayed us. Hephaestus stood in silence, his face unreadable. Hermes smirked, always fond of clever rebellion. Athena looked thoughtful, calculating. She understood the power of flame, of thought, of cunning. Only Hera spoke plainly. He has lifted clay above the clouds. This cannot stand. Zeus nodded. A storm was forming behind his eyes, on the slopes of the Caucasus Mountains, where no man dared tread, and even gods walked lightly. Prometheus was chained. Hephaestus, with heavy heart, forged the bonds, chains of unbreakable adamantine, anchored in stone and sky. Each link bore a curse, and there Prometheus hung bound, stretched and silenced. But his punishment had only begun. Zeus crafted a torment for him, a creature born of divine wrath, a great eagle, massive as a mountain, with wings of iron and talons like scythes. Every day it came, descending with a shriek that split the heavens. It tore into Prometheus. It feasted on his liver, and each night the Titan's body healed only for the torment, to begin anew with dawn. So it was. So it would be forever. But Zeus's vengeance was not yet complete. He had punished Prometheus. Now, he would punish mankind, not with fire, for it had already been given, but with something far more dangerous, curiosity. And thus he summoned Hephaestus again. "Craft me a new creature," he commanded, "a being shaped like them, but fairer. Give her form from earth, but soul from Olympus, and I shall give her a gift they will never forget." And so the forge blazed again, but this time it was not for war or chains. It was for a woman, the command to create. The fires of Olympus had cooled after Prometheus's punishment, but the fury of Zeus still burned, unquenched by the agony of a single chained Titan. He had struck the rebel, yes, bound him to stone, and carved out his immortal flesh each day with talons of wrath. But the gift remained. The fire continued to blaze in the hands of mortals, and with it, their minds grew bold, their hearts less fearful, and their defiance less quiet. Zeus, father of gods, master of sky and storm, would not allow it to go unanswered. He would not take the fire back. No, it was too late for that. The gift had been lit, and once fire finds breath, it spreads. Instead, Zeus would deliver another gift, a perfect gift, a punishment wrapped in beauty, stitched with charm, laced with delight and dread. Not thunder, not plague, not war, but a woman. "Summon Hephaestus," Zeus commanded, his voice rolling through Olympus like a slow rolling storm. The smith god arrived, his face sooty, his leg dragging behind him. He was the maker of chains, of weapons, of thrones and armor, and now he would become the maker of vengeance incarnate. Zeus stood before the divine forge and pointed to the cold stone. "Shape her from earth, from water, from wind. Let her be like them in form, but unlike in essence." Hephaestus bowed and began. From sacred clay and mountain spring, from wind-woven mist and gold-dusted soil, he molded the form of a woman. He carved her with careful hands, softening her edges, shaping her limbs with a craftsman's reverence. But he made her more than mortal, more radiant, more symmetrical, more alive. When he was finished, she lay upon the pedestal, lifeless but lovely, a vessel waiting to be filled. Zeus stepped forward. "Now," he said, Let the gods bless her. One by one, they came. Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, touched the clay woman's head. Let her think, she said. But let her curiosity always outweigh her caution. She gifted the woman logic and wit, but also a hunger for answers, a flame that would never rest. Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, passed her hand over the figure's face. Let her charm even the stars, she whispered, and with a breath, gifted her a beauty so profound that men would weep and women would envy. Hermes, god of speech and trickery, placed 2 fingers on her lips. Let her speak with silver, walk with grace, and lie when she needs. He grinned. He gave her a voice that could soothe beasts and stir kings to madness. Hera, goddess of marriage and queen of Olympus, narrowed her eyes. Let her be loyal until she is not. And thus, she gifted the woman the burden of longing. Demeter gave her the gift of growth, fertility, comfort, the power to nourish or withhold. Apollo gave her music and poise. Artemis gave her independence. Even Dionysus, with wine-stained fingers, gave her laughter and celebration, but also the temptation of excess. And lastly, Zeus himself approached. He gave her a box, a simple jar, beautiful but sealed. Within this jar, he said, placing it at her feet, are the blessings of Olympus. But they are not for you. Never open it, not for any reason. The warning curled in her ear like smoke. Not a threat, a mystery. With that, Zeus breathed life into her. The clay warmed, the eyes opened. The woman drew breath, not a gasp, not a cry, but a slow, curious inhale. She rose. The gods looked upon her and were struck. She was more than the sum of their gifts. She was art. She was power. She was unknowable. Zeus smiled. He named her Pandora, all gifted, he said. For in her all our gifts reside, and in silence they watched her take her first step. Zeus sent Hermes to guide her, to whisper lies and charm into her path. She would be delivered not to Prometheus, no, that Titan still hung in torment, but to his brother, Epimetheus. Prometheus had warned his brother, never accept a gift from Zeus, but Zeus had crafted a gift that no man could refuse. And so Pandora, with her bright eyes and shadowed soul, descended from Olympus, with the jar in her hands and curiosity in her heart. She did not yet know what lived inside the box, only that it called to her the gifts of the gods. Pandora descended from Olympus with beauty in her eyes, music in her voice, and a mystery bound in clay. Each step she took through the realm of mortals left a hush in the wind, a tremble in the trees, and an ache in the hearts of those who glimpsed her. She was not a goddess, nor truly a mortal. She was something new, something crafted. The gifts of the gods did not sit upon her shoulders like garments, they lived within her, like a fire hidden beneath snow. And though she did not yet know it, each gift was both a blessing and a curse. Athena's wisdom and restless mind. From the first moment of awakening, Pandora could feel the pull of thought like a tide that never settled. Athena's touch had given her logic and perception, the ability to see patterns in chaos, meaning in dreams. She could learn a man's intentions by the way he breathed. She could remember every word ever spoken to her. But alongside that gift came restlessness. She could not leave questions unanswered. She could not bear the sound of silence. The world, to her, was not enough unless it was understood, and understanding would always demand more. In her mind, the jar at her side whispered, not in words, but in the form of mystery, what was in it. Why was it sealed? Wisdom brought wonder, and wonder is the first root of temptation. Aphrodite's beauty and the power to captivate. When she walked among mortals, they turned to watch her, not just the men, but the women too. Even the animals stilled when she passed. Her hair shimmered like golden threads. Her eyes were wide and unknowable. her voice soothed without effort. This was the gift of Aphrodite, and it flowed through Pandora like spring through a rose. She could bend hearts, stir longing, but she did not yet know the burden of that beauty, how it could twist love into envy, attention into obsession, desire into ruin. What she gave freely, others would come to demand, and she would never again walk without being seen. Hermes' cunning and the art of words. Hermes had touched her tongue before she ever spoke, and with that touch came the silvered gift of speech. Pandora's words danced. She could persuade a merchant to give her wares without coin, soothe a crying child with a single lullaby, and stop an argument with a glance and a whisper. But Hermes had also given her trickery, and she felt it rising in her when she laughed. A delight in mischief. A smile that sometimes hid too much. Words are powerful. Words are dangerous. Pandora could spin them like thread, and in doing so, she could unravel peace or not conflict. The gods had made her eloquent, but they had also made her dangerous. Hera's longing and the seed of discontent. Hera had gifted her with loyalty, with devotion, with the ability to bind herself emotionally to a man, a family, an idea. But Hera, goddess of jealousy and vengeance, had laced the gift with something deeper, longing. Pandora could love, yes, but she would always feel that something was missing, a void she could not name, a sense that no joy was ever whole, no peace ever complete, and it would live in her heart like a shadow. Demeter's fertility and the touch of creation. Pandora's presence brought blooming where she walked. Flowers opened when she smiled. The air seemed warmer. Demeter had given her the power to create, to heal, to nourish. Pandora could nurture. She could soften hard things, bring life to what had once been barren. But creation and destruction are sisters. What can grow can also wilt. And one day, when the jar would open, it would be her touch that ushered in both, Apollo's music and the flame of light. Pandora hummed melodies she had never been taught. She could dance in rhythm with the wind. She could hear truth in voices. Apollo had gifted her with light, with grace, poise, and the echo of the sun. She could illuminate, but she could also blind. Artemis's independence and the spirit of the wild. Despite her beauty, her charm, her warmth, Pandora could never be fully possessed. There was a part of her that would always be distant, a part that needed solitude, the touch of trees, the call of freedom. It was Artemis who had placed this in her, so that even as Pandora fell in love, she would never truly belong to anyone. It was the gift that made her untouchable and unknowable. Dionysus's joy and the seed of excess. Finally, Dionysus had gifted her laughter. Pandora could find joy in the simplest things. She could dance under starlight, drink deeply, sing without care. She brought delight to others, lightness in heavy times. But joy, unchecked, becomes indulgence, and indulgence becomes temptation. In that laughter lived the seed of carelessness, a gift as beautiful as it was dangerous. Each god had given her something, but none had warned her what it might become. She carried it all with her, like the sealed jar at her side, without knowing which parts would bloom and which would break. She was the gods' masterpiece, but also their weapon. And as she drew nearer to Prometheus, to the first mortal heart that would love her, the gods watched in silence, waiting for the moment she would open, not the jar, but herself, the forbidden jar. The jar was beautiful. It stood as tall as Pandora's knee, its shape elegant and smooth, carved from pale stone that shimmered faintly in moonlight. Runes, unreadable even to her divine mind, curled around its neck like vines. The lid was sealed with a golden clasp, simple in design, but final in its presence. It did not tremble, nor hum, nor glow. It simply waited. From the moment it was placed into her hands by Hermes, Pandora felt its weight not physical, but emotional, like carrying a secret too heavy for thought. "You must never open it," Hermes had whispered, smiling with a glint in his eye. Zeus said so. That was all. He said it as though she would understand, as though warning alone was protection enough. Pandora had traveled far by then. She had crossed fields where mortals toiled with new tools forged by Prometheus's flame. She had seen children playing under torchlight, and elders warming themselves around fires that crackled with stories. The world was filled with sound and light, and yet, in her shadow, the jar never left her side. The gods had not told her what was inside. They had only whispered, and in their silence, she began to wonder. What if it was filled with wonders? What if it was a test? What if the gods had meant for her to open it to prove her loyalty? The questions spiraled inside her like smoke. At night, she would stare at it. When the world around her slept, and the stars blinked quietly above, she would run her fingers along the lid. She would press her ear to its cool surface and swear she heard breathing soft and rhythmic, like something dreaming just beneath the seal. She whispered to it once, "Who are you?" The jar did not answer, but the air shifted. The longer she carried it, the more it seemed to pull at her. Not physically, no. It was always still, always silent. But in her dreams, it changed. Sometimes it was a cradle, holding something precious. Sometimes it was a beast, snarling behind the lid. Sometimes it was her own heart, sealed and silent. She awoke from those dreams breathless, heart pounding, her hands gripping the jar's neck like she might open it without realizing. And always, in the dream's final moment, a voice, "You were made for this." During her journey, mortals asked about the jar, what is inside. She always smiled. "It is a gift from the gods," and they nodded in awe, stepping back as if its surface might burn them. She never said what she truly believed, that the jar was not a gift, that it was a riddle, that it was a mirror, and one day it would show her something she did not want to see. One night, as she sat beside a river's edge, the moon casting silver ribbons across the water, she asked the question aloud, "What happens if I open it?" The wind answered. It brushed her cheek, soft and sudden, and she felt, for the first time, fear. Not the fear of punishment, not the fear of gods, but the fear of herself, of what she might do, of what she might already be. For curiosity is not a sin. It is a force like gravity, like fire, and the gods had placed that force within her, braided it into her bones, laced it into her breath. The jar was forbidden, but she had been made to question, and slowly, gently, Pandora began to understand. The jar was not only her burden, it was her reflection, it was her destiny, and one day the seal would break not because of a command, but because she would choose it, and that choice, more than fire, more than punishment, would change the world again. The journey to Prometheus. The day the gods sent Pandora to Prometheus, the sky was unusually still. No eagle flew, no thunder rolled. The sun floated in a breathless silence as if Olympus itself was holding its breath. Hermes was her escort, the messenger god striding beside her with laughter in his eyes and mischief curled in every step. He did not speak much, though he watched her often, like a poet observing the final line of an unfinished verse. Pandora carried the jar tightly against her side, not like a burden, more like a question that had begun to pulse. She walked with grace, but also hesitation. She had heard the name of Prometheus, the foolish brother, the after-thinker, the titan who lived in the shadow of his wiser sibling. Prometheus. He had not stolen fire. He had not defied the gods, but he had loved his brother. And in that love, he had been warned. Accept no gifts from Olympus. That was the warning Prometheus had spoken with iron certainty before the chains, before the eagle, before the endless agony carved into his immortality. Prometheus had nodded. He had vowed, but vows, like fire, are fragile things. The home of Prometheus was modest, a simple dwelling made of stone and sun-baked clay, nestled in a quiet valley, where fields rippled under wind and animals grazed without fear. It was a place of peace, and into this peace Pandora stepped. She did not knock. Hermes opened the door and bowed slightly, with all the drama of a theater curtain rising. Brother of the Firebringer, he said, your gift has arrived. Prometheus looked up, and the world tilted. He had never seen such a creature. Not goddess, not mortal, not flame, not flower. She stood at his doorway, hair kissed by the sun, eyes deeper than reason, and something in her, something behind her silence reached into him and unraveled all hesitation. He had been warned, but warnings mean little when beauty walks into your life carrying a voice that softens every thought. Pandora did not smile first. She waited, and when he smiled, she smiled back, and that was all it took. The days that followed were gentle. Pandora helped in the fields. She asked questions that made Prometheus laugh. She sang songs she didn't know she remembered. And each night, they sat beside a fire she did not make, but which warmed her all the same. Prometheus, slow in thought but rich in feeling, found in her a presence that healed something he hadn't known was broken. He no longer thought about Prometheus. He no longer thought about the jar. And so, the warnings faded, until only the warmth remained. But Pandora could not forget. Each morning, she saw the jar in the corner of the home. She had set it there, gently, as one places a candle in a tomb, not to banish, but to wait. Sometimes, it pulsed in her vision, as though light moved within it. Other times, it was perfectly still, like a breath held far too long. She never touched it, but she could not ignore it. It was like a name on the tip of the tongue, a thought unfinished, a silence that begged to be broken. One evening, after a day of laughter, as Prometheus slept beside her with peace carved across his face, Pandora rose from the bed. She crossed the room barefoot. She knelt beside the jar. Her hand hovered over the lid. She did not open it, but for the first time, she leaned in and whispered, "What are you?" And though no sound answered her, she felt something stir inside, something waiting. Outside, the stars blinked quietly, and far away, from a cliff upon the edge of the world, Prometheus dreamed. He saw a valley bathed in moonlight. He saw a woman holding a jar, and he wept not from pain, but from the knowing. The flame had been given. Now came the consequence. The illusion of peace. Peace, when it comes, rarely announces itself. It arrives like a soft Wendian brushing through a valley, felt more than seen, precious because of its silence. In the days that followed Pandora's arrival in Prometheus's home, peace settled upon the valley like a hush. The jar remained sealed, and for a time, all was well. The mortal world continued its quiet transformation. The fire gifted by Prometheus burned in every village. It crackled in homes and forged the iron of new tools. Mankind grew clever. They built with stone, danced with flame, and worshipped the unknown sky. In the corner of their modest home, the jar sat like a silent sentinel. Prometheus no longer noticed it. To him, it had become furniture, a curiosity without consequence. But to Pandora, it was the center of the room. She went about her days with grace. She learned to shape dough and to till the earth. She played with village children and spun thread beside elder women who shared stories. They said she was a blessing. They said she was a gift. She smiled, always, but inside her, something shifted. Each morning, she awoke with the taste of dreams in her mouth. Dreams that clung like cobwebs. A voice, whispering from behind the jar's lid. A flicker of wings. A sense that peace was not real, only temporary. Prometheus adored her. He praised her laughter. He sang her name. He looked at her as if she had no shadows. But he did not see the quiet moments when she stared at the jar too long, when her fingers hovered near it, when her breath caught in her throat for no reason. Love, when blind, often forgets to ask questions. And Pandora, when asked if she was happy, always said yes. She believed it, mostly. Then came the festival. Each season, the village gathered to thank the gods. They built fires, offered fruit and wine, sang songs passed down through the generations. Pandora stood at the edge of the crowd, smiling. But as the firelight flickered across her face, something inside her stirred a hollow feeling, a question with no shape. What had the gods truly given? What had they truly hidden? The jar, even from miles away, pulsed in her mind. She returned home before the singing ended. She needed silence, but silence only made the whisper louder. That night, as she lay awake, while Prometheus slept beside her, she asked herself a question she had never dared before. What if I was never meant to resist? The thought came like a crack in a dam. It rushed into her, filled her, and would not leave. She rose from bed. She stood before the jar. The moonlight painted it silver. She traced the rim with her fingertips. And for the first time, the clasp moved. Just a twitch, but enough. Pandora gasped. The jar was not sealed by force, only by will. Hers. She stepped back, heart pounding. She did not open it, but she knew she would. Not because she wanted to break a rule, not because she sought revenge, but because the jar was part of her, like breath, like flame. And no one, not gods, not love, not peace could change that. In the stillness of night, she whispered, "If peace is only an illusion, let me be the one to shatter it." And outside, the wind shifted. Far off, in a forgotten place, a shadow uncurled its wings. The time of silence was ending. The temptation grows. Temptation is not a sudden blaze. It is a slow, persistent ember. It smolders beneath words, beneath silence, beneath the breath between thoughts. And in the days that followed the festival, that ember inside Pandora began to burn. She tried to ignore it. She sowed. She gathered. She kissed Prometheus good morning and good night. She laughed with the villagers and accepted flowers from children, but each time she returned home, her eyes found the jar. It stood in the corner, silent, still perfectly untouched, and yet it pulsed in her thoughts like a second heartbeat. The clasp had twitched. She had seen it, felt it, and now it called to her in more than dreams. At first, it was small things. She began spending longer moments near it. She cleaned the space around it with care. She began speaking to it softly. When Prometheus was away, as though it were a child, she didn't know how to hold. Why did they send you with me? What are you keeping from me? What if I'm not afraid? The jar never answered, but something shifted in the air around it. A stillness too deep, a weight too real. Sometimes, when the house was empty, she would place her hand on the lid and close her eyes. She could almost hear voices, not clear, not words, but longing, like something desperate, like something buried alive. She dreamed again. This time, she stood in a dark field, the jar beside her, open and empty. All around her, shadows moved like breath, and one of them, in the shape of a woman with her own face, whispered. It was never about opening it. It was about becoming it. Pandora woke gasping, drenched in sweat. She ran to the corner. The jar was still sealed, but her hands trembled. One morning, Prometheus found her sitting beside it. He frowned. "You've been watching it a lot lately." She smiled, but her voice was distant. "It watches back." Prometheus knelt. "You know, Prometheus warned me. He said the gods would trick us, that no gift from Zeus came without a curse." She nodded. "And yet, here I am." They sat in silence. "Do you trust me?" she asked, quietly, "with all that I am." She looked at him. "Then let me carry this burden." He didn't answer, because he didn't understand. Not yet. That night, she lit no candles, She did not eat. She sat beside the jar, as though keeping vigil for something that had not yet died. She placed her hands on the clasp, and it no longer resisted. The seal, once golden and tight, now felt like warm wax beneath her touch. She could open it now, easily, without force. But she did not. Not yet, because she realized something in that moment. The gods had not made the jar her punishment. They had made her the key. She was the lock. She was the gate. And when she finally opened it, it would not be because she disobeyed. It would be because she became in Olympus. The gods stirred. Hermes leaned against a pillar, smiling slightly. Athena frowned but said nothing. Zeus looked into the fire and said, "It will happen soon," and no one disagreed. In the valley, the winds began to shift, and in her chest, Pandora felt the ember flicker into flame, the unleashing. It happened not with a roar, but with a whisper. The sun had barely begun to rise when Pandora stood before the jar, alone. The sky outside the window was the color of ash, and a stillness hung in the air like held breath. Prometheus was gone to the nearby fields. Unaware that history teetered on the edge of silence, Pandora's hand trembled only slightly as she touched the clasp. It did not fight her. It opened with ease, as though the seal had always been a suggestion rather than a law. The lid lifted, and the world changed. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a sound faint, like wind in a dead forest. Then, a scream, a soundless scream, as if something that had never known voice had been waiting centuries to cry. Darkness spilled forth. It poured like smoke, but moved like thought, fast, sharp, searching. From the jar erupted shapes and shadows, winged things, clawed things, things that howled without mouths. Pandora fell backward, gasping. They swarmed the room, passed through the walls, soared into the sky. Hatred, jealousy, war, greed, famine, pestilence, death. Each had a face. Each had a voice. Each shrieked with ecstasy as it escaped. And the moment they touched the world bent, crops withered. Children wept in their sleep. Men turned on each other with no cause. Lovers betrayed without reason. Peace fractured. Hope dimmed. Pandora crawled toward the jar, eyes wide with horror. "What have I done?" she whispered. But there was no one to answer. The house was cold now. The walls, once glowing with morning light, were gray with shadow. She reached for the lid, tried to close it, but something inside still stirred. Something different. A single voice, not a scream, not a wail, a whisper, soft, gentle, calling. She paused, trembling, listening, and in that stillness, she understood. One thing remained. Not all had fled. One presence lingered at the bottom of the jar. She leaned closer. The voice spoke again, not in words, but in feeling, warmth, light, possibility, hope. Pandora's hands closed around the rim, and for the first time since she opened it, she began to weep, not from fear, but from the knowledge that she had not released only despair, but also the one force that could stand against it. Far away, Prometheus returned to find his home changed. He found Pandora on her knees, the jar beside her, glowing faintly with golden light. Her face was wet with tears, but she looked at him not with guilt, but with awe. "I opened it," she said. He looked at the world beyond their door. The skies were darker, the winds heavier, and yet something stirred in his chest, a flicker, a flame. "What is left?" he asked. Pandora touched the jar. "Hope," she whispered. And outside, in the trembling world, a child lit a candle against the dark, the last voice. In the jar. The jar was still now, silent again, but not empty. A thin stream of golden light pulsed faintly at its core, like the last heartbeat of a dying star or the first breath of something newly born. Pandora sat beside it, her palms pressed to its side, tears drying against her cheeks. Her body trembled, not with fear, but with something more complex. The world outside had changed. She could feel it in the air, the heaviness, the tension. A sky that once welcomed morning with bird song now echoed with silence. Crops sagged, families wept. Hope itself had been leached from the land, and yet it remained, a single warmth, a voice within the jar. Prometheus returned in disbelief. He stepped carefully, as if afraid the world might shatter beneath his feet. He found Pandora crouched on the floor, glowing faintly in the rising gloom. His first words were not anger, nor accusation. He simply asked, "What happened?" And Pandora, her voice quiet as falling ash, replied, "I opened it." He knelt beside her. His eyes flicked to the jar. "And what's left?" She did not answer with words. She simply placed his hand atop the lid, and the warmth touched him too, a soft hum beneath his skin. A presence, fragile but unwavering. It wasn't loud. It didn't shout like the evils that had fled before. It whispered, but its whisper was powerful enough to pierce despair. They stayed beside the jar for hours. Pandora did not try to open it again. She didn't need to. The presence within had no desire to escape. It had no wings, no claws, no vengeance, only waiting and understanding. It had been the last to enter the jar, perhaps placed there by a quiet god, or perhaps born from the tension between destruction and mercy. Whatever its origin, it was clear now. Hope had chosen to remain, to stay with mankind, to face the evils it had once been sealed alongside. Later that night, as stars returned cautiously to the sky, Pandora told Prometheus everything: the gifts of the gods, the voices in her dreams, the pull of the jar, and he listened. When she had finished, she waited for anger, but instead, he reached for her hand. "We are not broken," he said, and in his voice, hope stirred. They left the jar on a stone pedestal at the edge of the valley, surrounded by flowers that had somehow begun to bloom again. It remained sealed, but its presence radiated outward, not in fire or storm, but in warmth. And slowly, the world began to change again. People helped each other stand. They held each other closer. Fires were lit not just for warmth, but for gathering. And though evil now walked the earth, hope walked with it, like a shadow that defied darkness. The gods watched in silence. Zeus said nothing, but the storm in his eyes had faded. Athena tilted her head, contemplative. Hermes smiled faintly, like one who knew all along, and somewhere, far away, Prometheus looked up from his lonely cliff and whispered. She opened the jar, and he smiled. She let the truth in. The last voice in the jar was never meant to be loud, only faithful, and in every child's laugh, in every hand extended across grief, in every moment, someone chose kindness over cruelty. It lived. Hope, unseen, but never gone. Redemption and legacy. Time passed, as it always does, but something had shifted. Where once the world had only feared the wrath of the gods, it now lived with something more complex, a balance between ruin and resilience. The evils released from Pandora's jar were real, tangible, and unrelenting. They walked beside men in every age. Hatred, sickness, deceit, war. But they were no longer alone, because hope had stayed, and in that choice, that last whisper from the jar, humanity found its defiance. Pandora did not flee from what she had done. She did not ask the gods for forgiveness. She did not try to reverse the world she had unleashed. She simply remained. She helped heal those she could. She comforted mothers who lost sons to war, tended the sick when famine struck, and whispered to children that even in darkness, a new dawn always came. In time, the people stopped fearing her. They began to understand her. She was not the cause of evil. She had merely revealed it. She had lifted the veil. And when the world shook, it was because it had been sleeping too long. Prometheus remained by her side, and their home became a place of quiet legend. Travelers came from far places to speak with her, not as a goddess, but as a woman who had touched truth. They asked her questions. Why did you open it? What did it feel like? Was it worth it? To each, she answered simply. I was made to open it, but I chose to hope, and that choice, more than any curse, became her legacy. One autumn morning, as golden leaves danced outside their home, Pandora stood before the jar one last time. The flowers around it had grown wild, untouched and free. The lid remained closed, not sealed by fear, but by peace. She touched it gently, and for the first time in years, it did not whisper, because it didn't need to. Hope no longer lived only inside it. It lived in her, and in the world beyond, she passed from the world quietly, surrounded by those who loved her, a figure no longer of myth, but of memory. Her name, once spoken with dread, became a symbol not of tragedy, but of truth, of the power of choice, of the fire Prometheus gave, and the jar Pandora opened, and the fragile, unstoppable light that came after. Legends change with time, but one thing remains. When the world falls into darkness, when the evils seem too many, when despair knocks louder than love, the story of Pandora is told, not for her mistake, but for what remained after. A single ember, a whisper, a flame that never dies. Hope, the loom, beyond Olympus, before time could be named, before chaos birthed gods and titans. There was the loom. It did not sit in Olympus. It was not tended by the gods. It spun in a realm unmarked by sky or sea, cradled in the breath between life and death. Here, in a chamber carved from nothing and everything, three sisters moved in endless rhythm, never born, never dying, only existing. They were the Moirae, Clotho, Lachesis, Atropos, the Fates. Neither god nor mortal could see their world, much less enter it, and still all bowed to it. The loom towered above the sisters, an eternal instrument, crafted not of wood or bronze, but of law and essence. Threads of life flowed endlessly from its heart, each strand pulsing with a faint glow, each vibrating with a soul yet to be born, or already breathing in the world below. Some threads burned with potential, some dimmed with sorrow, some twisted with destiny. Clotho, the youngest, stood closest to the spindle. With slender fingers, she coaxed threads from the void, spinning them into existence. Her hands shimmered with creation. Each pull summoned a life into being, a newborn's cry, a first breath, a heartbeat. Finding its rhythm, she never smiled, not out of cruelty, but reverence. She understood what she made. Each thread, however fragile, was sacred, not a toy, not a whim. She spun with precision, with purpose, with quiet devotion. When a new soul emerged, Clotho whispered its name, not one spoken by tongue, but by soul. The name etched itself into the thread, and so life began. Beyond her stood Lachesis, with eyes older than stars. She received the threads Clotho passed on. In her hand, she held a rod not for striking, but for measuring. She stretched each thread across its length, reading the vibrations that hummed through its fibers. This soul will rise. This soul will suffer. This one will change the course of empires. With a careful gaze, she assigned length not in years or hours, but in purpose. She inscribed crossroads, mapped heartbreaks and triumphs. She was not cruel. She did not give agony without meaning. But she was not merciful either. She did not weep when she shortened a thread. She did not cheer when she lengthened one. She simply measured, for destiny, she knew, was not a favor. It was a form, and at the end stood Atropos, the oldest, the stillest. She did not touch the threads as Clotho did. She did not speak over them as Lachesis did. Her place was silence. Her touch was final. In her hand gleamed the shears, silver so sharp they could split time. When a thread had reached its measure, Atropos would lift the strand, feel its final hum, and cut. No flourish, no ceremony, just a whisper of steel, and then silence. A life ended, a soul released, and the thread was gathered, coiled in a jar of smoke and stars, where it joined the woven tapestry of history. This was their rhythm, their law, their duty, and they did not question it. Not until the day the loom shivered. It began with a single thread. Clotho had felt it form differently. Its glow was strange, tinged with gold and shadow. When she pulled it from the void, it resisted. It was not heavier. It was not longer, but it thrummed with a sound she had never heard. She hesitated. "Lachesis," she said, her voice barely a breath. The middle sister stepped forward, her rod glinting as she stretched the thread. She frowned. "This one, echoes," she murmured. Clotho tilted her head. "What do you hear?" Lachesis pressed the thread to her ear, and for a moment she went still. Then she looked to Atropos. The eldest had already moved forward. "Do not cut it," Lachesis warned. Atropos did not answer. She touched the thread, and the loom groaned. 1,000 threads vibrated in response. The sisters paused. Never had they witnessed such resonance. A single life, and the fabric of fate itself responded. Clotho lowered the spindle. Lachesis lowered the rod. Atropos stepped back from her shears. "This soul," Lachesis said, voice calm, "will decide much." Clotho nodded. "More than most." Atropos finally spoke, "And it will not end alone." They did not yet know who this thread belonged to, god or mortal, hero or tyrant. But the loom had shifted, and with it, the fates. From that day, the sisters watched more closely. They began to listen to the smaller hums, the subtler vibrations. They noticed how one life touched another, how love wore envy. Mercy rippled outward. The loom no longer moved with mere momentum. It danced, it trembled, it remembered. The sisters did not change their duty, but they began to wonder, not about their power, but about their witness. They were not gods. They were not kind. They were not cruel. They were the weavers, and now, for the first time, they looked at what they wove and saw it. Clotho, she who spins the beginning. Before the gods walked Olympus, before Titans tore mountains from the earth, there was Clotho. She was not born. She did not awaken. She simply was. She stood before the spindle of the loom, where silence hummed with potential, where the breath between creation and existence vibrated like a taut string ready to sing. From the void, her hands reached not as mortal hands do, grasping but as a force of certainty, shaping what had never been. Clotho was the beginning. Every thread that flowed from the loom passed first through her fingers. She spun not from fabric, nor from matter, but from essence. The first pulse of a heartbeat, the first cry of a child, the first thought that flickered in a soul not yet born. These were her materials. She spun them with calm precision. Each life began with a single touch of her hand. Clotho rarely looked up from her work. The threads flowed without ceasing, and each one demanded care. Though the loom was eternal, it was not automatic. Her spinning was not mechanical. It was a kind of love, impersonal yet sacred. She knew every soul that passed through her hands, even if she would never see them again. There was one she remembered. The thread came to her dim and knotted. Most threads arrived with light, a clean pulse, but this one stuttered as she drew it from the void, as if it resisted birth. Clotho paused. Threads did not resist her. She looked closer. Inside it burned two flickers, twin sparks. One carried rage, the other sorrow. Beneath both was something deeper, the potential to change everything it touched. She frowned. She did not judge, but she marked it, and she spun. The thread sang as it took form, not a melody of harmony, but of storm. She whispered a name only the loom would remember, and the child was born. She did not know where her threads would go. That was not her purpose. She was the gate, not the path. But sometimes she wondered. Did the souls feel her when they awoke? Did the breath they first drew carry a memory of her touch? Did the stars she shaped into them flicker in their dreams? These thoughts did not slow her hands, but they softened them. Clotho spun the lives of mortals and gods alike. She spun Zeus from fire and wind. She spun Hades from silence and shadow. She spun Hera from iron and lilies. Even the Moirae had threads. Clotho had once spun her own, not in rebellion, but in acknowledgement. Lachesis had measured it, and Atropos would one day cut it. This, too, was part of the order, for creation without consequence is not fate. It is chaos. There were times when Clotho wept, not often, not loudly, but when a thread came that sang with music she had never heard, when its pulse felt like home, when its glow cast shadows on her own face, she wept. She wept not because it would one day end, but because she had to let it go. Her job was to begin, to give, and then to pass it forward. She knew that mortals believed the fates to be cruel, that their weaving was cold and mechanical, that destiny was a trap, but Clotho did not spin cruelty. She spun possibility. She gave each soul the chance to exist, and that, to her, was the greatest mercy. One day, she felt the loom tremble again, another strange thread, this one bright, sharp, vibrating like light in a storm. She reached for it, and for the first time, it reached back. She gasped. Never had a soul touched her before it was born. She spun it anyway, with reverence, with fear, with hope, and when it was done, she placed it gently on the path to Lachesis. "Be careful with this one," she whispered, not because it was dangerous, but because it was new, a thread that would change others not by force, but by presence, and though she did not know what it would become, Clotho smiled, because every beginning, no matter how uncertain, was a gift. Lachesis, the weaver of the path. Beyond the humming spindle where Clotho spun the first golden breath of life, Lachesis stood at the heart of the loom, where Clotho's task was the spark. Lachesis's was the shaping. She was the mid-sister, the keeper of moments, the surveyor of fate. Her fingers did not tremble as they moved over the threads, nor did her breath catch as she measured. She had done this since the first heartbeat was born into the void. Since time began its endless echo, her rod, long and slender, carved from the axis of the cosmos itself, was both ruler and oracle. It did not measure in hours or years, but in purpose, in weight. In consequence, each thread Clotho passed to her was unformed yet full life, without story. It was Lachesis who gave it direction. She did not choose who would be born noble or poor, who would fall in battle or rise in song, but she sensed potential, mapped out intersections of lives like stars crossing the sky. She could feel the gravity of a soul's choices even before they were made. There was a thread she remembered above all others. It arrived quiet, too quiet. It pulsed like a dying ember, barely there, and yet, when she placed her rod against it, the thread sang not with beauty or strength, but with complexity. It was a maze, a map of impossible turns. She traced its length, saw it brush against others not yet spun, saw it veer toward ruin, pull back toward redemption, fall again, then rise higher than expected. She whispered to it, "I see you," and as if in reply, the thread glowed briefly, acknowledgement. This thread would touch hundreds, perhaps thousands. It would make people better. It would break them, too. She marked it with a silver glint and passed it on. Caucasus never rushed. To each life, she gave the same care the beggar's child and the warlord's son, the poet and the thief, the forgotten and the famous. She measured not by merit, but by impact. Some threads were long but dull, some short and searing. She knew that length was not greatness. There was once a thread no longer than a breath. She measured it only to see it end, and yet it glowed so brightly that even Atropos paused before cutting it. That soul, though fleeting, lit fires in others that burned for generations. This was the truth of Lachesis' work, not to judge, but to understand. She often wondered if mortals felt her work. When they stood at crossroads with hearts pounding, when they hesitated before a choice that would echo forever, did they know? Sometimes. She thought they did. She watched their lives pass like rivers through valleys. Some forged new channels. Others dried too soon, but all flowed from her hands. Once, a thread rebelled. It twisted sharply, resisting the path she set. Caucasus gripped it tighter. "Do not fight," she murmured. But it did. It looped around others, dragged them into chaos, tore away from measured lines. She stared at it not in anger, but in awe, free will, the very thing the gods feared. She didn't cut it. That was not her task. She let it go to Atropos, trembling in her hand, and when it passed from her fingers, she whispered, "Let her be merciful." At the edge of her domain, she glimpsed the other two, Clotho, forever spinning, Atropos, forever still. Caucasus stood between them, the balance. She did not begin, she did not end, but without her, the thread would have no meaning, and in every choice, in every forked road, in every quiet second before love or loss, she was there, Atropos, the shearer of endings, where Clotho's hands spun beginnings, and Lachesis' rod measured the unfolding of lives. Atropos stood at the threshold, where all things must return to silence. She did not smile. She did not speak unless necessary. Her presence was an anchor still, solemn, eternal. In her right hand, she held the shears. They were not tools of violence, though they had ended wars. They were not weapons, though gods had feared their glint. They were instruments of truth, forged in the space between time and stillness. The shears could cut through soul stuff, through divine fire and mortal breath alike. No thread, no matter how bright or how brief, escaped her edge. Atropos did not move until it was time. She watched the threads approach her, already spun and measured. Their colors danced with stories, some stained with blood, some flickering with laughter, others dim with regret, but all carried the rhythm of completion. She could feel it in her bones. The moment when a thread was ready, not early, not late, right. She did not hurry. She did not hesitate. She cut, and life ended. Mortals called her cruel. They built temples to appease her. They prayed to avoid her. They wept and cursed her name in their final moments. But Atropos was never cruel. She was release. She was the peace that follows the storm, the silence after the last breath. She did not decide how long the thread should be. She simply honored its truth. There was one thread she remembered. It arrived shaking, not with fear, but with resistance. It had knotted itself, wrapped around others, tangled fate in its wake. Caucasus had passed it with a heavy gaze. It will not go easily, she had warned. Atropos held it gently. It pulsed in her palm, angry, afraid, defiant. She spoke to it, rare as thunder in snow. You have walked your path. You have burned and healed. Now, rest. And with reverence, she opened the shears. A single breath passed, and the thread fell silent. Sometimes the gods asked her for mercy. They knelt, promising temples, offerings, devotion, but she could not be bribed. Even Zeus, mighty and thunderborn, once stood before her. Not today. He had begged, and she, without blinking, replied, "Not because you command, but because Lachesis measures more." He left, silent, shaken. Atropos did not enjoy her task, but she valued it. She understood something even Clotho and Lachesis sometimes forgot, that without endings, life had no meaning, that without death, time would be a curse. That release was not punishment, it was peace. One night, a thread arrived that shimmered like starlight. It had touched thousands. It had been loved, hated, worshipped, feared. It hummed with music and memory. She held it longer than most, not to delay, but to honor. She closed her eyes and cut. The world sighed, and somewhere a child was born. Clotho's spindle turned. This was the truth of the three sisters. One spun, one measured, one ended. But all three were one voice, one pattern, one eternal loom. And Atropos, with her silver shears, reminded all creation that nothing was forever, except the story, the thread that binds gods. There are powers in the cosmos so ancient, so absolute, that even gods fear to speak their names. The Moirai, the sisters of fate, do not sit upon golden thrones, nor raise storms, nor hurl bolts of lightning. They do not rule through wrath or wisdom, but through something far more enduring, the silent order of inevitability. Clotho spins, Lachesis measures, Atropos cuts, and through these three motions, the universe breathes, high above the mortal realm and beneath the gaze of even Olympus. The Moirai continued their eternal labor. The great loom of destiny shimmered with threads both new and ancient. Golden strands pulsed with divine energy, while duller ones flickered faintly, some nearing their end, some trembling in resistance. It was not only mortals who passed through their fingers. Even the gods themselves had threads. Yes, even Zeus. There had once been an age long before temples, before titans, before the stars had names. When one god had dared to ask the question, none should speak aloud. What if fate could be broken? His name is lost now, swallowed by time and silence. But the Moirai remember. He had discovered the thread of his own life, tangled within the loom, faintly glowing with potential. He believed himself powerful enough to sever it from its pattern, not to die, but to escape his destined path. And so he tried. He stole a spark of flame from Hephaestus's forge, forged a blade sharp enough to cut divine silk. He crept toward the loom, when the Moirai had turned their gaze elsewhere. Or so he thought. But you do not sneak past those who weave all things. The loom itself rejected his presence, and when he raised the blade to slice the thread, the shears of Atropos descended not in punishment, but in finality. He died not in battle, not in vengeance, but in silence without a whisper from the gods. Even his thread turned to dust. That story spread through Olympus like wind through hollow columns. Since then, none have dared. Yet curiosity, like fate, does not die. It transforms. One day, Apollo, god of prophecy, stood before the loom. His golden eyes narrowed at a strand that glowed too brightly. The thread of a mortal child not yet born. "Why does he shine?" he asked. Clotho did not look up. "Because you will love him," she said. "And what will he become?" Caucasus replied without expression. "He will rise and fall and teach." "How will he die?" Apollo asked softly. There was no answer, but Atropos's shears gleamed in the candlelight. Even the gods were given glimpses, but never clarity, because to know one's end is not to escape it. The fates do not delight in suffering, nor in triumph. They do not root for heroes, nor sneer at villains. They simply weave. A life of greatness may be cut short in a breath. A life of quiet may ripple into the heart of eternity. They know not why, only that it is. Sometimes Clotho pauses in her spinning, sensing a soul that burns too brightly. Sometimes Caucasus lingers too long, measuring a thread again and again, unable to choose between grief and glory. And sometimes Atropos holds her shears still, just for a moment longer, just to let one last breath pass. Even they feel, but they do not interfere. They are the pattern, not the players. And so the loom continues. The gods rise and fall. Mortals live and die. Stars are born and forgotten. But through it all, the three sisters remain, not feared, not praised, simply obeyed. For there is no altar to the Moirae, only the soft hush of thread sliding through immortal hands. And if you listen very carefully, on the night a child is born, or in the moment just before you fall asleep, or in the breath before a final goodbye, you might hear them not speaking, not singing, but weaving. Because even now, in this very moment, they are weaving you.